remember this shocking front page story in the Toronto Star a few months ago. People wishing for the deaths of the unvaccinated, complete heartlessness. Now, allegedly, these were tweets that the Toronto Star found online, but an investigative journalist showed that's just not the case. Some of them were very, very obscure tweets. Some were written ironically, and others were simply confected by the Star. But no matter what their explanation was, the purpose, or the effect rather, was clear. That is exactly how the Toronto Star felt. They hated the unvaccinated and wanted to whip up rage. The number one newspaper in Canada, measured by readership, the number one recipient of Justin Trudeau's bailout money, measured in absolute dollars, whipped up a hatred against the unvaccinated. Well, here's the Toronto Star, just absolutely against anger. There's an anger in the land, people, and the Toronto Star wants to get to the bottom of it. Just like OJ, he's going to find who the real killers are. Well, the media will never blame itself. Joining us now via Skype from Winnipeg to talk about this is our friend Spencer Fernando from SpencerFernando.com. Great to see you again. The layers of irony, the layers of projection here are too many to count. What do you make of the Toronto Star calling for an end to anger after they whipped up so much of it, Spencer?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's obviously very hypocritical. If they at some point admitted, if they said something like, look, we've participated in a lot of this anger, we put out a front page that was, trying to whip up anger and, really seems like hatred in many ways towards people. They may not describe it that way, but that's, I think, how many people took it. If they said, okay, we admit our role and in being part of the country getting angrier, then I think people would be more sympathetic to them. They'd say, okay, people are angry all over the place. You played a role in it. You're admitting it, and now you're trying to tone things down. But for them to just act as if they're just completely innocent victims, like, oh, what happened? I mean, we had nothing to do with this. We're so shocked that people are angry, but nothing to do with us. For them to do that, I think a lot of people are just not going to be sympathetic to what they're saying now, is because they don't have the credibility to say that, they're not part of it. I mean, they were part of it. They pushed, an attitude towards millions of Canadians. That was an attitude of, hatred or dislike, very strong dislike. And when you put out a front page saying, things like, oh, just let them die, you can't really get more dehumanizing towards people or more harsh towards people. So how do you think people are going to take that? People are just going to say, oh, well, that doesn't bother me at all. That's totally fine. And they were doing that at the same time, of course, that Justin Trudeau was trying to run an election campaign on a very similar theme. He originally, before the election, said, oh, we're not a country that mandates vaccination. He seemed to understand how divisive and dangerous it would be. But once he started to get a little concerned about his poll numbers and an election came around, then all of a sudden he totally flipped. And so the media should have been holding him accountable for that, but instead they largely went along with it. And that's a big reason that so many people have lost a lot of trust in the establishment press. Yeah.
I think there's another reason why people are skeptical of the Toronto Star suddenly calling for harmony and love. And it's because when they talk about hatred, they don't say, well, the hatred is in every human heart, perhaps even our own, and let's all try and bring back love in this country and unity rather than division. And yes, we were they see not only are they failing to recognize their own role, but if you ask the Star, if you ask the CBC, if you ask Global News where the hatred and anger comes from, they will give a partisan answer. They will say from right-wingers. They will never say from partisans on both ends of the divide. They will never say both sides. They will always use it against their political enemies. And I notice a campaign, the Canadian Association of Journalists. I see Rachel Gilmore of Global News, the Toronto Star, literally asking the police to get involved in tackling people who criticize them. Now, Spencer, I'm sure you're the same way. If there is someone who's actually making a violent threat, absolutely the police should get involved. That's in the criminal code. That's not new. If the threat comes in person, over the telephone, or over email, it doesn't matter. A threat's a threat. But I think what these folks are doing so often is conflating conservatives clapping back at the media, conservatives shouting back at the media that they felt shouted at them, conflating anger with threats and violence. That's what scares me. When the Toronto Star and the Canadian Association of Journalists say, hey, police, get involved, I don't believe they mean just for the death threats. I think they mean anyone who's mad at us, have the cops knock on their door like they do in the UK.
Yeah, that's what's concerning. I think, anyone who's making threats against a journalist, against their life, or, hinting that they're going to, hurt them, that's obviously unacceptable. And everybody should denounce that. Whether it's a journalist you like or dislike, that's obviously unacceptable. And the police should investigate that. I mean, that's already against the law. It should be investigated. And people should not be fearing, for their jobs. You put out bad reporting, you shouldn't fear for your life, not job. Your life, though.
Yeah.
And so that's not acceptable. But the problem is what you can see what they're doing is they're going to start saying, oh, well, okay, it's not just threats that are the problem. It's, the criticism and people who they so distrust in the media and so distrust in the government. And that's what's leading to all these threats. And then they're going to say, well, to protect journalists, we need to obviously crack down on people who are too critical of the media or too critical of the government. And then they're going to push for legislation. And of course, the Liberals will be glad to oblige them, right? I mean, the Liberals have been pushing in that direction already with online hate legislation. They're obviously expanding the definition of hate, keeping it very vague as well, which makes it easy for the government to interpret it in a very political and partisan way. So I think that's the concern. They're taking a very legitimate issue, which is threats against the life of journalists, which is unacceptable and everyone condemns. And then they're trying to take that and expand that and say, well, that's just a part of the problem. But that really, those people are just motivated by people who criticize the media. And so that's where I think they're going to go too far, and they're going to push for, ironically, an environment that's far less free and really makes, freedom of the press non-existent.
What you just saw was an excerpt from my nightly show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every weekday I do a monologue. Usually it's about half an hour. Then I interview an interesting guest, and then we read my hate mail or my fan mail, whichever is more fun. It's only available behind a paywall, though. That's how we pay our bills here at Rebel News. We don't take a dime from Justin Trudeau. But the good news is it's only $8 a month, about half the price of Netflix. And in addition to my nightly show, you also get weekly shows from 4 other friends here at Rebel News. So you're getting 36 shows a month just for $8. I think it's worth it. And even if you're not quite sure, do it anyways, because we rely on viewers like you to keep us free and independent. I promise you I'll never take a dime from Trudeau. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com and click subscribe. Thanks.